Kansas and Iowa State. Kansas, of course, has been one of the sweet Cinderella cute stories in college football. And cute, I don't mean that in some sort of a ha-ha way. I mean that in a way that they are one of the great stories early on because of who they've been for a long, long time and who they are now. Iowa State, is there any hangover from the loss at home to Baylor? Are they just better? Does Kansas still just have too much? How do you see this one, Paul?
I'm leaning Iowa State in this game just because I don't think Kansas has seen a team that's as disciplined as Iowa State. Houston was a great win for them, but we've seen what's kind of happened to Houston. And West Virginia was a great win for them, but that was in overtime, and it got kind of crazy. And we still have a lot of questions about West Virginia. I think we have less questions about Iowa State. I don't think Kansas has the defense that is going to continue them on this streak. They're going to be in a bowl game. They're going to beat a couple more teams in the Big 12. There's no doubt about that. That's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be this weekend. I do think, though, just based on the fact that the way that Iowa State can sometimes play offense, that if they go in a rut and Kansas has one of those 21 or 24-point quarters, it's going to be tough for Iowa State to come back. No matter how tough and disciplined that defense is, they're going to give Kansas some things, but I don't think they're going to let Jaden Daniels run as much as he did in the last 4 games.
Yeah, I'd expect Iowa State to give Kansas as many problems as they've had all year. Defensively, they're a good ball club. I think they showed that at times last week. I wasn't overly impressed with Iowa State. I think they're fine. They're a fine team, but for all this thought that maybe they're better than expected and flying a little bit under the radar, I kind of saw a little bit of that percolate in the first couple weeks. I don't think that that's the case. There's a little bit of Hunter Decker's like, oh, well, Brock Purdy wasn't that good anyways kind of thing going on, and I don't know about that. I don't think the quarterback position is really the swing one way or the other. I just think that they're a fine team, basically. So, yeah, I think they're capable of getting beat by Kansas, and I think they're also capable of beating Kansas. And I think it's just going to be a matter of which Cyclones team we see because Kansas is going to do its thing. But I would expect ISU to rise up and make a statement with this game. And if they don't, then, man, the Kansas fever is really going to get crazy because that will have been, that'd be 2-0 in the Big 12. Have beat Iowa State and West Virginia. You'd be undefeated overall nearly halfway through your schedule. So that would be significant. And, I think that there's going to be some points scored. I think Iowa State can hang with them and beat them, but they just got to limit the mistakes. So it should be an interesting game.
Deckers last week threw 2 picks. Baylor forced turnovers. They have not done that early on, but now they did. That's kind of part of their MO. That's part of who they are. He was sacked 4 times. Here's the stat that popped out to me. And Hutchinson had 8 catches for 78 yards, but he never got the big one. The thing that jumped out to me, Iowa State against Baylor. They can't do this against Kansas. 27 carries, 66 yards. They had the long run by Brock of 37 yards or so, and then that fumble recovery. 2.4 yards per carry against a defensive front that we know is really good. They must figure out a way to get Brock going and the running game at Iowa State.
Yeah, I think they
slow down the game, maybe stretch the game as far as the time of possession. Not that they can't score, but I think that's a big deal.
I agree with you, Smoak. I think that, and I think they'll be able to run it a lot better on Kansas than they were against Baylor. That's Kansas's weakness hasn't been completely exploited yet, but teams have scored on them. They've just scored more every week, and they can just get in those flurries. So that's what Iowa State has to prevent on defense, and maybe you can prevent it on offense a little bit by taking away a couple of those what will be probably quick possessions for Kansas where they have big plays and scores later on in the game.
All right, the game in Austin, Texas, coming off that overtime loss in Lubbock that was dramatic. And they are home against Neil Brown and West Virginia, who got kind of a nice kick in the pants with a win against Virginia Tech, who they should beat. But, this game here, Virginia Tech has had a week off. They get the win. Was it a Thursday night game?
Well, they played a Thursday night.
That's right. They have a couple of extra days off. They do feel a little bit better about themselves after a tough start, the losses to both Pittsburgh. And then, of course, my God, you lost to Kansas. That now looks different. But West Virginia on the road, we have discussed this. Even with Texas 2-2, and we feel like they're still pretty good, this is one I think that will set up my goodness, what's going on now? Not just because Oklahoma's next, because we don't know enough about them. But they cannot lose this game. Can they?
No. I mean, they can, but That would put them back behind, where they think they would be. And again, we've talked about it at length about Quinn Ewers not being there, and that's a big game changer for Texas. But Xavier Worthy's hurt. They've got all these different things going on with that offense that have kind of changed their overall plan for the year. But they had the players-only meeting this week, which, is one of those things that it's either happens when things are going really bad with the coaching staff, which I don't think is the case there, or it's just this group has not figured out a way to find a leader and come together. Or
maybe that's a sign that they do have some that want to cut this thing off at the pass before the dam breaks.
Yeah,
and then there's an emotional landslide of, oh, my God, and you start pointing fingers as well. Craig, your thoughts, West Virginia, Neil Brown, and also Texas and Austin.
West Virginia's getting on a nice run here of late. I think their schedule certainly helped create some of the worry, but to also create some of the hope coming out of this first month is that even with their record not being 4-0 or whatever at this point, they've played good teams. And in the case of Virginia Tech last time around, to go out on a weeknight, even if that's more familiar to them than to some, in a rivalry game, it's ending. You're on the road at their place. I just think that there was a lot going on in that game with Neil Brown and company. And so for them to go out and win was a big deal in my mind and really set them on a nice path entering Big 12 play. JT Daniels makes a world of difference for them because I think if they had a quarterback that was there before, they'd be like 1-3 right now or something like that, which isn't a ton different, but it feels a ton different and it looks a ton different. They're capable at quarterback, and they've got some nice pieces around him, and I think their defense is good. So yeah, I like West Virginia as a team, but it's not about them really in this game. It's about Texas. Like, Texas can't lose this game. They just simply can't. You can have your excuses. Quinn Ewers is hurt, or this, or Xavier Worthy got hurt last week, or if we do this or if we do that. All that's fine, and yes, the injuries are a factor right now for Texas. Without Quinn Ewers, you do wonder what if, or who are they really compared to who they should be if they had him. But having said all that, and as much of an excuse as valid as that might be in some ways, they still cannot afford to lose this game. They just simply can't. Hudson Card is banged up, but he's played valiantly, and I don't know how they get it done exactly, but they have no choice to get it done, because even with a little bit of a built-in excuse, if you go lose to West Virginia at home after the debacle in Lubbock that you basically choked away, and I give credit to Tech to some extent, but that was also just Texas should have finished that game. Yeah. Should have finished that game, and they didn't. And then, Bijan fumbles to start over. It's just like you can't do that. And so I think they've got to win this game, so I expect Texas to win this game. And if they don't, however that happens, no matter how that happens, and that's going to be a real story, I think.
And the win against Virginia Tech, which they dominated, they had to separate in the second half, 33-10. They gave up 35 yards on 18 carries. Virginia Tech couldn't run it. They didn't try to run it, less than 2 yards a carry. If I'm Texas, and I know they can throw it around with what they have, and we don't know about Xavier Worthy and all that, hand the damn ball to Bijan Robinson or Roschon Johnson and just let them wear somebody down. Now, West Virginia's pretty good up front, but it is interesting. There's a couple of guys from West Virginia. You hear about JT Daniels. C.J. Donaldson's a good player. Running back, big kid, 100 yards a game or close to it, just less than that, but 7.3 yards a carry, 6 touchdowns on the ground. Bryce Ford Wheaton reminds me of a Des Bryant type body, big body, 6'3", 224. Didn't do much against Virginia Tech, but he does have 4 touchdown catches. We'll see what happens with him, especially around in the red zone. So that's that game. Also, Texas Tech and K-State both. Big stories last week. Texas Tech with the win against Texas at home, and then Kansas State on the road against Oklahoma in Norman, which for them is almost like a home game. Something has to give in this game. Something has to give. Can Donovan Smith continue to protect the football like he did against Texas? Can Kansas State with Deuce Vaughn, Adrian Martinez just kill the clock? Are they going to let Adrian Martinez throw it a little bit? What do you think?
I think one of the other big keys that you have to think about this game is both these teams are coming off very emotional upsets. And do they carry that in, or does this wind up being a trap game for one or the other because they can't carry it from Norman or, from, of course, back home at Lubbock? But can Kansas State carry in that emotion that Adrian Martinez brought? Can Texas Tech, get over, and move on to the next the everything runs through
1-0,
Lubbock
1-0,
game. Yeah.
1-0.
Yeah, can they do that? Now, look, both these coaches are really good at galvanizing their team into emotion. I would think that's probably Joey McGuire's strongest suit. And so if they can keep that feeling going, both of them, this is going to be a classic game. I just wonder if, it's tough to get up every single week, and then you have to turn around and, you can't really celebrate those wins because you've got to turn around and play each other the very next week. So two teams in similar situations here that have had, big wins and also some disappointments early in the year, needing a big win to continue in the conference race.
Yeah, I like K-State at home here. I know that they had the big emotional win last week, but so did Tech. So I don't think I think it's just basically splitting hairs here. I mean, they're basically coming off the same thing. So I don't know why one would be emotionally, fragile and the other wouldn't be. Or, I just think it's going to be all even in the end. So give me the home team. I'm very curious, however, how, Kansas State plans on scoring, because I don't think Texas Tech's just going to let them run the football. That seems to be, one of the first areas of focus for Joey McGuire and his team. So I think they're going to be out to stop the run. If you watch that tape, that's really what you're planning for watching K-State. It's Deuce Vaughn and Adrian Martinez. So what does K-State do to throw them off balance a little bit? I mean, can Adrian Martinez go out there and sling it around to back them off and to be able to allow, the run game to thrive like it did last week? I don't know. I think it's going to be fascinating to see based on how Kansas State won and what Tech will look to do. And so then how Kansas State, counters that. I'm very curious to see. And then for Texas Tech, as Donovan Smith protects the football, then they'll have a good chance to win. If he doesn't, he throws some dumb interceptions. They might still have a chance to win, but it'll be a lot less than it would be otherwise. So, when he plays well, they're pretty good, although they still have some flaws. But when he turns it over like anybody else in any other team in America, they're going to, probably struggle. So they're 0-1 on the road. Their only road game. Give me Kansas State at home.
All right. The Big 12 this year is 3-5 against top 25 teams. Now, you've had them play each other, too. Some of that's happened. But Oklahoma, Texas 0-1. They lost to Bama. Kansas State's 1-0. They won at Oklahoma. Iowa State's 0-1, lost to Baylor. West Virginia 0-1, they lost to top 25 Pittsburgh. Baylor 0-1, they lost to Brigham Young, and so they have not beaten a top 25 team. That can change if they beat Oklahoma State. Texas Tech has already played 3 teams in the top 25, now 4 with Kansas State, and then it's Tech, and then I forgot who it is after that. So they have been a part of some games like this. So this is not new to them, coming off the emotional win in Lubbock against Texas.
And the one they lost to is still in the top 25 are the others.
NC State, Houston's not. Houston and Texas are out. Yep.
Yeah. And they were fringe. They were like 24, 23. That doesn't take away from what you're saying. But when you say 3 top 25 wins, it's like, yes, but
3 top 25 opponents.
But yes, but one of those is still in there 2 weeks later, and the other 2 were kind of fringy early in the season. So they count for what they are.
It was just to let you know they've played 3 top 25 games, but you're right, 2 of those teams are no longer ranked in the top 25.
Which is what I was trying to explain. Yeah, so that sounds good, but my point was, but you can kind of see that and go, okay, well, there's a reason to believe that that's not the end-all, be-all.
If they win at Kansas State, they're 25th. They won't be ranked. Yeah. So, it's kind of like up and down, but that's where they are. Oklahoma emotionally got rocked at home by Kansas State in a game in which they gave up 14 points early, and K-State really dictated that game almost from start to finish. Had a couple of chances, but they just couldn't take control of the game. Dylan Gabriel, at times I thought he missed a lot of throws. You don't see an Oklahoma quarterback do that very often. Maybe he bounces back. And we don't really know much about TCU with Sonny Dykes. They had the nice emotional win against SMU. Oklahoma's still favored, still ranked in the top 20, and they play in Fort Worth.
I just don't. I still feel like I don't know a whole lot about TCU. Although that was very telling last week that they, gripped it and ripped it on offense a little bit, jumped out to a big lead on SMU and held them off. In what has been a tougher game for them over the last couple of seasons. I think that a lot of that had to do with Sonny Dykes just knows the entire DNA of the team he was playing because he built it. So, we'll see against Oklahoma. I don't know if this Oklahoma team is one I'd want to play right after an emotional home loss. I think that might not be a good thing for TCU. I don't know if they have the dogs to run with them, but if maybe Oklahoma got exposed last week, then maybe we might see some things. I just don't think it's going to be like that week to week for them. I think that Kansas State has been their, Achilles heel the last, forever. It feels like now, and that this week they can kind of maybe roll.
Mordecai threw for 372 yards, but he did throw 2 picks in that loss to TCU. So they have given up some yards passing in the win against SMU. We'll see what Oklahoma can do, but OU's got to get back to basics, Craig. To me, they have to run the ball better. And they hear about Venables. He's a defensive guy, just like last year with Alex Grinch, whatever. I still look at them defensively, and I'm not impressed about them finishing and cleaning up tackles. And that seemed to be a problem again last week. And of course, Deuce Vaughn will make you do that, and maybe an Adrian Martinez as well.
Yeah, I mean, they very well could. That's kind of what we were saying a few minutes ago, was that's basically what Kansas State's done so far. So how are they going to, attack and be able to, hit Tech in a different way? So, yeah, I mean, that was pretty one-dimensional, and yet Oklahoma had no answer for it. I don't understand how you go, okay, Kansas State's coming in. How could Kansas State possibly beat you? Well, they could run Adrian Martinez a bunch and Deuce Vaughn. Okay, we should probably stop that. Yeah, that'd be a good idea. What do you fear outside of that? Well, absolutely nothing about that offense do I fear outside of that. Cool, and if we shut that down, that should probably be good. They didn't shut it down. They didn't force Adrian Martinez to throw the football. They didn't keep the ball out of his hands or out of Deuce Vaughn's hands or shut Deuce, basically K-State did the one thing that they are potentially lethal at, and Oklahoma had no way to stop it whatsoever. So that's a little bit concerning when you're a defensive-led team, that they just did the most obvious thing to you and you could not stop it to save your life. They shot themselves in the foot a lot, whether it's not finishing drives or penalties, missing on some throws, like you said with Gabriel. He still had a huge game, but he did miss on some key moments with some throws. So, I would expect Oklahoma to bounce back, but I just – it's in Fort Worth. I don't think that's that big of a deal, but I don't know how good TCU is. I really don't know how good they are. I know that I can name as many threats on their team as I can on Oklahoma's, which you talk about Oklahoma, like who are their stars? Who are their stars? Eric Gray, is he a star? I don't think so.
Major's the running back? No.
No.
Mims, the wide receiver.
Mims is a star.
Yeah.
Potentially Dylan Gabriel, I mean, you could put him in that category, but they're not like just loaded for bear like they were with the Lincoln Riley, teams where you're like the star receiver, star back. I don't know. I'm very curious to see this game because I don't know, quite frankly, how good TCU is, even though there's some things to like about them and they played pretty well so far. And with Oklahoma, we don't know how a Venables team bounces back. So very interesting. Being on the road and coming off a loss, I think they'll have some extra motivation, though, and I default to the Sooners.
Well, last week, K-State ran for 275 yards against Oklahoma. TCU's got a couple of guys that can run the football, Kenry Miller among some others. They averaged 5.6 yards a carry. Now, Oklahoma ran the ball better than I thought, 226 yards, 6.5, but they usually have the long run. And against Nebraska, it was Dylan Gabriel. So I don't know. We'll see. They did give up TCU a lot of passing yards to Tanner Mordecai, which is what SMU's bread and butter is. So we'll have the national games, some of the other games around the country outside of the Big 12, top 25. But we also have Grayson Grundhafer. He is, of course, a co-host of Bearcast. He's the recruiting coordinator for Sikkim365.com and football analyst next on Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports.